Okay, so now let's talk about diseases, like full-blown diseases that we know can result as a result of potassium deficiency. And one of them is kidney stones. So if you've ever been diagnosed with a kidney stone, ask your doctor, measure potassium. Let's change our color here. Let's get something a little bit easier to read. So measure that potassium. If you've ever been diagnosed with kidney stones, you got to make sure that your potassium levels are normal. Heart disease, again, this could be heart arrhythmias, heart palpitations. It could also be elevations in blood pressure, which is a form many people consider to be a form of heart disease. Vasoconstriction of your blood vessels. They don't dilate very well. That's why the pressure goes up. Well, that can reduce your oxygen to your other tissues and lead to all types of problems. Bone loss is associated, or osteoporosis is associated with long-term potassium deficiency. Stroke can be a condition caused by potassium deficiency. This is what I was saying earlier, is that this is one of the nutrients, right? It's essential, meaning your body can't produce it. You have to eat it. You have to get enough in your diet. And when you're too low over time, it can kill you, right? And the way it kills you, death, right, is through, these are some of those mechanisms. So type 2 diabetes, again, what did we say earlier? We said that potassium could reduce your insulin. That could lead to the doctor wanting to put you on a diabetic medication that can actually have side effects nutritionally that increase your risk for the development of heart disease. And so then we also have a disease called encephalopathy, which is the swelling of the brain, and mental dysfunction or mental disorders. Now, what's interesting here, mental disorders, some like depression is an example, or bipolar. With these types of diseases, there are certain meds that doctors will prescribe, certain antipsychotic meds or certain medications, emotional medications that lead to increase in blood sugar, right, that affect your potassium as well. So a lot of your antipsychotic medications will actually contribute to diabetes and again, increase your blood sugar, thus increasing your risk for the development of a potassium deficiency. So you got to be careful there. So those of you listening to this that are on these medications, again, don't stop your medicines. That's the conversation that you need to have with your prescribing doctor. What you really want to do is you want to go in there armed with this information so that you can ask for the right type of testing. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the different potential for medications, but this is a list. You can see here, this is a list of some of the medications that we're absolutely certain will cause potassium deficiency. And one is steroids. So corticosteroids, corticosteroids will deplete potassium. One of the reasons why we know this is because so many people go on corticosteroids to block inflammation, and we'll see their potassium levels start to drop. So if you've ever suffered or struggled with chronic inflammation, chronic autoimmune disease, chronic pain, and your doctors have you on a corticosteroid, something like prednisone or methylprednisone, etc., you know that one of the side effects is potassium depletion. Now, on the same token, if you have intense stress in your life, so if you're under a lot of stress, your body is going to produce cortisol, more cortisol of your own. And this is one of the reasons why chronic stress will also deplete potassium levels. So again, chronic stress causes your body to make the hormone that lowers potassium, but taking the synthetic versions of that same hormone will also deplete potassium levels. So be aware of that, because again, if you're taking medicine or if you're chronically stressed, you need to consider having your potassium monitored or measured to see whether or not it's something that is going to be needed to be elevated. Aspirin can deplete. Aspirin and other NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications, can deplete potassium. And one of the ways is through damage to your kidney, but also to your intestine. Inflammation in your intestine depletes your body's ability to absorb potassium. And we see this is super common. For those of you, again, who followed me, maybe some of you are celiac diagnosed, or maybe some of you are what are non-celiac gluten sensitive, right? Where you have a gluten issue but you don't have celiac disease, but the damage to your gut is there, this can actually cause potassium deficiency in a big way. We'll see this too in people that have like chronic vomiting or chronic diarrhea, again, inflammatory bowel disease. So it's not just celiac disease, but it can also be Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So again, if you've got those diagnoses, you want to be a little bit more concerned about the potential, right, that you're depleting your potassium through malabsorption. Okay, and then again, going back to the NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like aspirin, but between the damage to the kidney and the intestine, it can reduce your ability to absorb potassium. Now, something else you should know: when you add, some people are taking steroids plus aspirin. Okay, so there's like a 1-2. They're doing them both. When you add these two together, they work synergistically and they create even more gut damage. So it's important to know that too. If your doctor's putting you on both, then the effect is even greater and can create greater degrees of side effects. Additionally, we have diuretics here. Diuretics, as I've mentioned a number of times, diuretics deplete potassium. And as they deplete potassium, can create the very disease that they're intended to treat. Remember, for most people, what are the diuretics treating? Excessive fluid retention or high blood pressure, right? And so again, when you lower potassium, that you actually will increase blood pressure. So again, if you're being treated for high blood pressure and your doctor's not monitoring your potassium, but you're taking a diuretic, you definitely want to make sure that you ask when next time you go visit your doc and say, hey, look, we need to be monitoring my potassium. I'm aware that this drug can deplete it. Now, interestingly enough, some blood pressure medications will actually elevate your potassium. And so there's another side to this. Too much potassium can also create problems. And so there's a class of medications called ARBs. That stands for angiotensin receptor blockers. These particular medicines actually increase your potassium and can put you in danger, because increased potassium can also be deadly and can be dangerous. Now, interestingly enough, this same class of medication here has also been shown to cause villous atrophy, to cause the same damage to the intestines that gluten can cause. So again, something worth noting, because there are, I think last I checked, about 130 studies or so that show that this class of medications cause villous atrophy in certain people. Not in everyone, but in some people, and you want to be aware of that, especially if you've been diagnosed with gluten sensitivity and you're taking that medication. And then lastly, we have antibiotics. Antibiotics are also known to deplete potassium. So if you've been, chronically been using antibiotics, sometimes people come into my office and, they'll tell me, when I was a kid, for the first 18 months of my life, my parents had me on antibiotics. Or they'll tell me, hey, look, I've struggled and battled with chronic urinary tract infections, and so I've been on antibiotics in total, 4 or 5 years of my life I've been taking antibiotics. And nobody's ever even bothered to measure that potassium level or consider potassium as a potential for many of the symptoms that they were experiencing. So it's important to know, if you're taking any of these medicines, or if you have a strong history of using any of these medicines, and you have any of these problems here, or any of these symptoms here, then you definitely want to have that conversation with your doctor and get more investigation done, because otherwise, what could very, very well be a simple problem to fix may turn into a major catastrophe. Now, let's talk about food sources for potassium. Now, if you're trying to supplement, a lot of people say, well, what's the best potassium supplement? Potassium supplements, generally speaking, you're not going to get them higher than 99 milligrams per dose. So like if you're, if there's one, if you're taking a pill form of potassium, 99 milligrams per dose is about the max of what a pill can contain. And that's in a sense, that's pretty kind of problematic, because in order to get your daily recommended intake of potassium, you need about 4,700 milligrams a day, right? So basically, you'd need 47 pills if they were 99 milligram doses, and that's not realistic to do. So it's not a super effective way to get your potassium levels up. By contrast, A banana has, a medium-sized banana has about 400 milligrams of potassium. So this is about 10%, maybe a little bit less of your total daily need. And then if you're eating things like spinach, your chard, your dark green leafies, your Brussels sprouts, your broccoli, your asparagus, your cabbage and kale, if you have a nice, decent salad, over the course of your day, you incorporate, 7 to 10 ounces of these things into a nice meal, you're going to get a lot more potassium bang for your buck. This is really where you're going to get the bulk of your potassium. Now, potato, some of you don't want to eat white potato because maybe you're on a ketogenic diet, so this may not be an option for you, where now these greens are going to be a major option for you because they're super low carbohydrate. They're predominantly very low carb and protein, but super, super rich in potassium. So again, those of you following a ketogenic diet, you're going to do better with some of these greens, okay? Those of you not really following a ketogenic diet, following no grain, no pain, which is basically, it's not a ketogenic diet. We follow what's called the rule of thirds, where you get about a third of your calories from fats, a third from carb, and a third from protein. So it's a more balanced diet. But all of these things are acceptable unless you're sensitive or allergic to them, right? Now, some people say, well, what about meat? Because there's a crowd of folks out there that are following this really aggressive carnivore-style diet, and you get potassium from meat. But, as to quantity, let me give you an example. 3 to 4 ounces, let's just say you're eating turkey, you're going to get, about 400 milligrams. The same you might get 400 milligrams of potassium in that serving, same amount you might get in a banana, right? A good-sized banana. So same thing with beef. If you eat 6-ounce steak, for example, you might get about 4 to 500 milligrams of potassium from that. So it's not that meat is totally devoid. And again, if you're selecting, free-range organic, grass-fed, those are all good choices. And again, if you're not a vegetarian, those are all good choices. But pound for pound, right? In terms of quantity, in terms of size of food, you can get far more potassium from vegetables than you can get potassium from meats. You'd have to eat an awful lot of meat to get to that 4,700 milligrams a day. And for many people, that quantity of meat can create constipation, which, by the way, is can be another symptom of potassium deficiency. I didn't mention that earlier, but constipation and sleep disturbance can both be symptoms of potassium deficiency as well. But so if you're trying to hit this level, one of the best ways to do it in the least amount of calories, but in some of the most nutrient-dense foods, is to go with your greens, okay? And sweet potato is another really excellent source, very, very high source of potassium. Beets are a high source, but the greens on the top of the beets, the mustard greens, the beet greens, those are also rich in potassium. So again, do your best to try to get greens on a daily basis in your diet. You'll bring your potassium levels closer to that 4,700 milligrams a day than with just meat alone. And again, supplements, to do supplementation to get adequate potassium, you'd have to be swallowing an awful lot of pills, and it's just not practical for most of you. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.